Arrow ended a couple months ago, and with the 170 episodes and 8 seasons that we got from that show, there were a number of different main villains. Even though there were only 8 seasons, we got 14 main villains if you count the flashback villains, and also maybe secondary main villains who I think deserve to be main villains themselves, specifically one of them from Season 6, Cayden James. Now, this list could be a little bit different from if I do a list for other shows in the Arrowverse, because Oliver is a powerless hero who doesn't typically go up against powered villains. So most of the villains on this list do not actually have powers, and with that in mind, the list could be a little bit different for the most part until I get to the actual villains with superpowers. I'll be ranking them based off of their power, not powers, which is things like positions of power, how much power they have over people, maybe organizations they have, the amount of money they have. All those things can contribute to the amount of power a villain has without actually having powers. However, if there's any powers whatsoever that the villain has, then they will automatically be over any villain who doesn't have actual powers, no matter how minuscule those powers might end up being. With that in mind, let's rank all of the Arrow main villains from least to most powerful, starting with number 14 and the least powerful villain. Despite being my favorite villain from Arrow, I have to admit that Prometheus is probably the least powerful villain, or at least main villain, in the entirety of the Arrowverse, let alone Arrow itself. He's got no real positions of power other than maybe like a district attorney position in the Star City, which isn't really much of anything. He's not the leader of any organization, he doesn't really have a lot of money, and obviously he doesn't have actual superpowers. So all in all, he doesn't really have anything in terms of power to his name. He is very intelligent, but I don't really think we could count that because, I mean, most of the villains are intelligent anyway, and being intelligent, it's not a position of power, it's not really a form of power, and it's certainly not superpowers unless it's actually super intelligence like the Thinker from The Flash. So Prometheus is the least powerful villain from Arrow, but it just goes to show you don't really need to be powerful to be a good villain. Konstantine Kovar is not that much more powerful than Prometheus in terms of his position of power in the Russian government. It's never really confirmed, so we don't really know if it's more or less powerful than Adrian's district attorney's position in Star City. But there's one thing that he has over Adrian, which is control over the city of Krasnoyarsk in Russia, which is where Oliver spent most of our Season 5's flashbacks. So that's a part of city control. It's not exactly a very powerful city, it's not exactly a very large city, but it is definitely way more than enough to put him a little bit higher than Adrian Chase. Much like Konstantine Kovar, Cayden James' main source of power comes from his control over a city, as well he doesn't have any actual powers during our Season 6. During his season, he had, or his part of the season, he had control over the Star City infrastructure, which is already something, but then also he was able to use that control over the infrastructure to manipulate the government of Star City, which is, I think, one step above manipulating the government, or at least, or even like controlling the government of Krasnoyarsk, because Star City is a much more powerful city with a lot more people, and it's probably a lot richer too. So with that in mind, I think that's why Cayden James is higher than Konstantine Kovar, despite them having basically the same source of power. With Edward Fyers, we move into the military power category, as while he didn't actually technically have any position of powers in any military, he did have full support and financial backing from Argus. It was later revealed that Amanda Waller was the one who told him to blow up that plane so that they can kill Shayna Way. So he had that. He also had control over basically a whole army of men, which is like hundreds of men. So he definitely had that power, which I think is more than what we've seen so far. And while it's not enough to bring him higher in the list, he definitely was a powerful villain for the first villain that Oliver ever faced off against. General Shrieve also has military power, but I think it's a step above Edward Fyers, since he has a very, very high rank in the US military. Edward Fyers just had backing from Argus, which is definitely not nothing, also control over hundreds of men, but General Shrieve had a very high ranking in the US military, meaning he probably had all of that at his disposal, plus more. Again, not enough to put him a little bit higher on the list than he is right now, but it is certainly higher than Edward Fyers and every other villain we've gone over up until this point. Now, assuming that Anthony Ivo was the owner and CEO of Ivo Labs, which was introduced during Elseworlds, and I think that we can assume that because of all the connections. I mean, it's named Ivo, he owns it in the comics, they created Amazo using Mirakuru, and then Anthony Ivo during Season 2, he looks for Mirakuru, and his boat was called the Amazo. I don't think there is any coincidence there that doesn't say that he was the CEO and owner of Ivo Labs, meaning that he's clearly very, very wealthy enough to buy a whole group of pirates, wealthy enough to own an entire boat, the Amazo, and wealthy enough to go on a whole expedition finding a cure for his wife without worrying about financial backing whatsoever. With that in mind, he's very, very rich. I don't know if he's a billionaire. I don't know if he's as rich as, let's say, Malcolm Merlin, but he's very, very rich, which for the most part can be even more powerful than power in the military and all the other powers we've gone over so far. And much like Anthony Ivo, Malcolm Merlin's main source of power comes from his riches. However, unlike Ivo, we basically do know how rich he is, as we know that he is a billionaire, making him probably one of the most powerful people in the entire world. Obviously not counting anybody with actual superpowers. He is definitely up there as a very, very powerful person. Considering how wealthy he is, he could do a lot of things that maybe other villains that we've gone over so far couldn't do. Emiko Queen doesn't really have any powers, however, she is one of the most powerful non-powered villains on Arrow, as she is the leader of the Ninth Circle, who look like a bunch of bumbling idiots on Arrow, like they didn't look like threatening villains whatsoever. However, it's clear that they are indeed very powerful, as it was confirmed that they had a lot of influence on certain events during the history of the world. Like, they're a very old organization, much like the League of Assassins, who are clearly very, very powerful. Now, like I said, on screen they don't look very powerful, but it is clear that because she is the leader of this seemingly very powerful organization, I think she has to be fairly high on this list without obviously being higher than any villains with actual powers. Ghul kind of skirts the line between powerless and powerful, as he does kind of have a healing factor, but only when he's using the Lazarus Pit, which I think you could say is a form of power, which is why he's definitely the highest on the list when it comes to the villains with technically no powers. However, I don't think I could put him higher than the villains with actual powers, because this is something that he has to get something like external to do, so I'm not exactly sure that I'm going to put him any higher in the list. However, he is certainly very, very powerful from the healing factor, and also because he is the leader of the League of Assassins, which it looks like a much more competent version of the Ninth Circle. Obviously, the League of Assassins came first, but for some reason they made it so that the Ninth Circle is like they told us that they are more powerful because of their influence on history. However, on screen, the League of Assassins it's just more competent. It definitely seems like they know what they're doing much, much more. So because of that, and also because of his seemingly mystical powers, or at least the ability to use the Lazarus Pit, he's fairly high on the list. So during Season 6, Ricardo Diaz was not very powerful. Obviously, he had control over Star City, which would put him like near the likes of Konstantine Kovar and Cayden James, probably like on top of both of those two, but he would probably be number 11 on the list. However, during Season 7, while it was really never touched on again, he injected himself with some sort of serum that gave him superhuman strength. This is not something that he needed to do over and over again, so much like the Mirakuru, it was a one-time injection, and then he had the strength from then on out. And while they never really did anything with that, I mean, he had strength for one scene, and the next he was just a regular Ricardo Diaz, but he definitely had super strength, meaning that he's the first and probably least powerful villain on this list who actually has superpowers, because it's just enhanced strength. With the added effects of the Mirakuru, Slade Wilson, on top of his inherent badassery, has a number of new powers, along with the fact that his mind is clouded and he went insane, but he has enhanced strength, enhanced healing factor, which he can basically repair anything. It was said that he went through like the currents of the ocean, which ripped him down to the bone, and everything healed back from anything except for his eye. Enhanced senses, enhanced stamina, enhanced durability, enhanced speed, enhanced reflexes, and enhanced agility. All of which is not exactly superhuman level, like it's not exactly Superman levels of strength, or obviously not Flash levels of speed, but it's all way more powerful than a regular human is, and it's powerful enough so that Oliver was not able to even touch him without curing him in the end. With that in mind, Deathstroke is a very, very powerful villain, but there are others who I definitely think deserve to be higher than him. Despite facing off against Baron Reiter before he ever even became like anything like the Hood, Baron Reiter was one of the most powerful villains that Oliver ever faced off against because of his magical powers. These magical powers are much like Damien Darhk, although Damien has a better mastery than Reiter, which is why we haven't seen Damien on the list yet. But Baron Reiter has force-like abilities which he can basically just put his hands forward and make anything or anybody stop in their place, but also he can drain the life force from anybody, which is very, very, very powerful. While again, his mastery of these powers are not as strong as Damien Darhk's, he is still pretty good at them, and I mean, it's still way more powerful than any villain we've gone over so far. I think that Baron Reiter and also Damien Darhk would probably have no problem facing off against Deathstroke because they can make it so that Slade could not move at all, which is why he's very, very high on the list. And again, one of the first villains that Oliver ever faced off against is also one of the most powerful. Damien Darhk has, like I said, the same powers as Reiter. He has the force-like abilities, he has the life force draining, but also, like I said, his powers are, he has a better mastery than Reiter. Now, I do think that that's maybe not enough to make him higher on the list. They could have tied. However, the reason Damien Darhk is higher is, on top of the fact that he has those abilities and also a better mastery, he's also the leader of Hive, which is a criminal organization who has, well, again, much like the Ninth Circle, a bunch of incompetent idiots that they own. It's still an army of people that potentially, if they did it right, could have been very, very powerful. So that right there is better than Baron Reiter, and why he's higher than him, even though they technically do have the same powers. And finally, by far the most powerful main villain on Arrow, probably the most powerful villain in the Arrowverse ever, at least main villain, and one of the most powerful villains in DC Comics, that's the Anti-Monitor. The Anti-Monitor has nigh omnipotence, telepathy, telekinesis, possession, antimatter manipulation, power bestowal, levitation, energy projection, gravity manipulation, force fields, size alteration, essence absorption, earthquake generation, and as well as longevity, all of which pales in comparison to the fact, I mean, just look at his feats. He destroyed every single universe. That's an infinite amount of universes. Not only the fact that he destroyed a universe, but he was also able to do something impossible, which is get to an infinite amount, which is it doesn't make any sense. It's beyond the realm of thought, which is ridiculous. That's how powerful the Anti-Monitor is, and also the fact that Oliver beat him in the end means that's how powerful Oliver ended up being. So the Anti-Monitor is, I mean, a step above any other villain on Arrow, which is not a problem for the Anti-Monitor because it was the last season and that's where Oliver went as well. It definitely, even though he was that powerful, it wasn't too powerful, but the Anti-Monitor was the most powerful villain that Arrow ever had, and because Arrow's over now, is going to end up being the most powerful villain that Arrow will ever have going forward, which makes sense because he is the Anti-Monitor. So anyway, that is my ranking for the least two most powerful main villains on Arrow, but if you want to really say that it's only the villains with superpowers who would be counted, then it would be it would only be 5 villains, Ricardo Diaz, Deathstroke, Baron Reiter, Damien Darhk, and the Anti-Monitor, and maybe Ra's al Ghul. Now, I mean, this is a list that is objective, not subjective, but if you think I got something wrong, if you think you would change something about the list, one villain is maybe more powerful than the other in your opinion, let me know in the comments down below, and maybe what list you want to see next from Arrow now that it is over. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.